Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Where those lights are is on top of my bed, basically.
11 people are taken to hospital after a school bus plows into a house in Burnaby. And
oh my God, I got him. And I got floor seats right at the front.
the ecstasy
My gosh, it's so frustrating.
and the agony. Taylor Swift fans try to get tickets to her 3 Vancouver shows and hope for more pre-sales. Plus, all aboard, or try to. Tickets for the Stanley Park train are already sold out.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. The wait to buy coveted tickets for Taylor Swift's 2024 concert dates in Vancouver is finally over. Online sales for those who managed to get one of those elusive pre-sale codes began this morning. Our Janella Hamilton joined a diehard Swiftie as she tried to get seats.
Nervous. This is start to kick in. It's like, oh my goodness.
26-year-old Mickey Harris's hand shakes as the clock counts down.
Oh my goodness. One person ahead of you.
The North Vancouver resident enlisted the help of about 40 people to sign up for the pre-sale lottery, describing the process as very intense.
I had my family, my fiance's family, my mom and dad's friends also. I then went to people at work.
Only her fiance's sister received a coveted pre-sale code, giving her a chance to buy tickets with no guarantees.
She's become a cultural moment. So years from now, you're gonna wanna be able to tell your kids, your grandkids that you were there.
Front row and center.
Oh my God, I got him. And I got floor seats right at the front.
But for other diehard fans like Shay Harding's 2 daughters, the competitive process just to get a pre-sale code has been disheartening.
We're very bummed. It's a little disappointing because this would have been, or we were hoping would have been, their first concert that they've ever been to.
Her daughters trying just about anything to boost their odds at getting tickets, manifesting with crystals, candles, and chants.
We just kind of gathered them and grabbed our bracelets and all the Taylor Swift stuff we have.
In the end, the family was waitlisted for Swift's Vancouver show.
So good to be back in Canada.
There is no official number yet on how many people applied for codes, but estimates are it could be more than 20 million. Some experts are pointing a finger at Ticketmaster, saying there are better ways to make sure real fans can see their idols in concert.
The only fair way to do it is to have nominal tickets that are non-transferable, but that you can return. Because if you can transfer it, it means that it invites resale for profit.
However, he says a system like that is more complicated and costly. In the meantime, millions of Swifties are still holding out hope for future pre-sales.
We're still keeping positive that maybe something will work out.
Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
Oh my God. Are you tired? I'm dying a little bit.
As Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim puts it, it's back, it's awesome, and now it's sold out. The Vancouver Park Board says 23,000 tickets for the Stanley Park Christmas train sold out in less than 90 minutes today. The board says it normally has 3 trains running, but this year was only able to get 1 serviced, accounting for the speedy sellout. The popular holiday ride is part of Bright Nights, a fundraiser for the BC Professional Firefighters Burn Fund. It runs from November 30th to January 1st. The train hasn't run in 2 years because of COVID and mechanical issues. 11 teenagers were rushed to hospital today after a school bus plowed into a home in Burnaby. The RCMP says a sedan traveling west on Canada Way collided with the bus as it pulled out of 16th Avenue. The bus then jumped the curb, as you can see, and broke through the walls of a house. Police say all of the teens have been released from hospital, and the driver was not hurt either. The man who lives inside that house says it was very close.
That's my bedroom. The living room's behind that. So the TV was against that window wall there. It went flying into the living room, and my bed, literally where those lights are, is on top of my bed, basically.
That's scary.
It's very scary. Because if I was there, I literally would have been dead.
Police say impairment has been ruled out as a cause. Investigators are now looking for dash cam and other videos to understand what caused the crash. The BC government is hiring 271 ambulance paramedics, I should say, to try to improve emergency response in 60 rural and remote communities.
Paramedics will no longer be required to work or be available to work for 72 straight hours. There will be better shifts that will allow paramedics to have a work and life balance and will help better ensure all communities are covered, especially in the evenings.
The province says the hires will boost equitable access to health care and provide better compensation and working environments for paramedics. The communities receiving increased staffing include Gabriel Island, Gold River, Quadra Island, and Boston Bar. The BC Conservative Party held a rally against the mandatory vaccination of healthcare workers outside the legislature today. This after Conservative MLA Bruce Banman called for Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry to be fired.
This pander fest that we see on these issues is not appropriate. The best way to summarize my views comes from Dr. Henry herself. You know, we need to be kind and be calm and be safe.
Bill 36 gives the province increased power in governing healthcare workers in all sectors, including that they be required to be vaccinated against COVID-19. That law was introduced last November. Meanwhile, the deputy leader of the BC Green Party has been dropped for liking an online post comparing Dr. Bonnie Henry to a Nazi physician. Dr. Sanjeev Gandhi has been an outspoken critic of the BC government's healthcare policy. Road repairs for an overpass over Highway 99 in Delta have now been delayed until next year. Work on the Highway 17A overpass was supposed to start this week, but tonight the Transportation Ministry has changed the plan after hearing concerns about the impact to traffic over the holidays. The overpass was badly damaged in July after an overheight vehicle smashed into it. Repairs will now start in January and are expected to wrap up by early April. Air Canada is now apologizing to passengers who live with disabilities after a string of high-profile incidents we've been sharing with you, including a BC passenger forced to drag himself off a plane. Those complaints prompted Ottawa to demand an explanation. Ashley Burke now on the airline's new promise to do better.
Ryan LaChance says he felt dehumanized and humiliated after Air Canada staff dropped him in the aisle.
They treat us like we're cargo, and they just whipped us off and on the plane the same way they do the luggage.
Now a public apology.
The situation that some of our customers experienced is completely unacceptable, and we have let them down.
Federal ministers summoned the airline to Ottawa after a series of CBC News stories about the treatment of passengers who use wheelchairs.
Not only do airlines, need to be held accountable, they need to a lot better.
A Marketplace hidden camera investigation captured Air Canada workers struggling to get Alessia DiVirgilio on board a plane.
Please, guys, please. I felt humiliated.
In another story, passenger Rodney Hodgkins said he had to crawl down the aisle.
I'm just wondering what you personally think of hearing a story of someone having to drag themselves across an aircraft to get off.
I think my personal view reflects the view of everybody at Air Canada that it's not acceptable.
Air Canada said it's speeding ahead with changes.
We are investing in training for all of our colleagues that are involved with lifting customers into chairs on board aircraft, and also investing in even more equipment.
It also says passengers with accessibility needs will board first, and wheelchairs will be stored in the cabin when possible. Some say they'll believe it when they see it.
When I show up on a plane and I don't have to hold my breath, I'm wondering if I'm going to get dropped or my wheelchair is going to get damaged. I'll feel a lot better.
Disability advocate Mayan Ziv hopes it's the beginning of much more.
I think that Air Canada has violated the trust of disabled passengers, and it's going to take a lot more than promises and statements to prove that they can earn our loyalty as passengers.
Ashley Burke reporting. Now, making travel accessible and barrier-free means asking people with disabilities what they want and need. This BC travel agent is pushing for a seat at the table.
I'd like to see all the airlines meet with the Minister of Transportation. I'd like to see, personally, a committee established of the shareholders, like the people who have disabilities, not able-bodied people making the decisions for us. Talk to us. We know what we require, right? I mean, it's comes to everybody that's in with a type of disability, right? I may not know what somebody who is hearing impaired completely what they need when they travel, but I have a better understanding because I'm in a wheelchair and my legs don't work.
He also urges passengers with disabilities to prepare for the unexpected and to do their research before booking a flight. Every fall, the West Vancouver Streamkeepers Society checks salmon returns in Brothers Creek. It's a tributary that flows into the Capilano River. This year, they've recorded more than 40 dead fish along its banks. The former society president says chemical pollution may be to blame, namely the rubber preservative 6-PPD. It's used in car tires and ends up getting washed into the water.
When you get a big rainstorm, that water's got to go somewhere.
Right.
And the rainwater off the streets is not directed to a treatment facility like people may think. It's all put into storm sewers, and those storm drains and storm sewers eject it straight into the creek.
Barker says the pollution was made worse by this year's brutal drought, late rainfall, and a buildup of the chemical on the roads. Poppies have been appearing on lapels since the start of this month as Canadians prepare for Remembrance Day on November 11th. Our Maurice Katz hit the streets to ask people in Vancouver why they wear them.
Regardless of if you support war or not, there's still human people that went there and did something for freedom and for rights for Canadian people. And so I wear poppies to kind of honor that sacrifice and also the people I know who are veterans and who have worked and suffered for different reasons.
The reason I'm wearing a poppy is for Remembrance Day, to remember the fallen, the veterans that served our country. My father was in the Army, so in World War II, so yeah, it does mean something.
Remembrance in a few days, and we want to celebrate, well, not celebrate, but honor the soldiers that died for our country.
Just to remember the soldiers. I think it's important for her to know, being so young, that she needs to carry that on into the future.
Just remembrance, right?
To not forget.
It was a big sacrifice those guys made.
It's just a symbol of, remembrance, and even also with the fallen, quite a lot of unfortunate, people who are really honorable, and even also just who gave a lot for this country, has now been long gone, and we sort of remember them for the poppy. That's why I'm wearing it.
My grandfather was in both World Wars. If it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't have this country we have today.
Darius Madavi joins us with our first look at the weather. We've got some rain outside we can see. Started gray, but we need to talk about drought first.
Yes, so rain is good news still because we are still in a drought situation. We have improved on the coast. Even just from this last update, you can see a little bit of improvement here on the south coast. We have improved a little bit in the southern interior as well. Haida Gwaii has moved up one level, but generally speaking, a bit of good news. But I need to really point out, like in the piece, still the Northeast still very much in a drought situation throughout much of the central interior as well. And we've been looking at this map for months now, and I feel like we're sort of getting accustomed to seeing it like this. So I just want to compare it to 2021, our last fall where we didn't have a drought situation. This is what we usually look like at this time of year in terms of drought. They don't publish a sort of average drought situation, but this is fairly typical compared to this, which is what we've been looking at for the last few months. So still very much a serious drought situation. Do we have some rain coming? Yes. Is it going to make a big impact? Well, most of it is coming for the coast. You can see that already streaming into the south coast. We had some on the north and central coasts as well, although radar coverage there is not where we'd like it to be. But if we look at the models over the next 48 hours, you can see most of it building up along the coast, some of it breaking into the interior, especially into the southeast. But for the most part, what we're looking at is the rain coming to the south coast. Quite significant amounts, but we'll have to take a look later this hour to see where exactly that rain is coming and when we're going to see it.
Okay, thanks, Darius.
Thanks, Dan.
The Columbia River Treaty, one of Canada's largest international agreements, is being renegotiated. But one important group says they are being left out of the conversation. The Sinixt is a First Nation mostly based in the United States that was once declared extinct by Canada. But our Supreme Court has ruled they are not. With their traditional territory covering the Columbia River, they want a seat at the table. The CBC's Jackie McKay went to Washington State to meet with them.
These kinds of things are important for your future and your children's future, your grandchildren's future.
Shelley Boyd has spent most of her life advocating for the Sinixt and is the language and culture teacher in Inchulum. Almost all the kids who go here are Sinixt. Even though they live only an hour away from the Canadian border, most of them have never been on their traditional territory. Boyd says Inshalem is located in one of the poorest counties in Washington, and crossing the border isn't always so simple.
They found gold in Republic, and then we got pushed. Now we're down here. So we're not on our traditional territory anymore.
For a lot of these students, this is the first time they're hearing about the Columbia River Treaty, and they don't understand why they're being left out.
So I think we shouldn't be recognized as just Americans if we come from Canadian land as well.
We should also get kind of like a big say in it too, because it was ours to begin with.
The Columbia River Treaty is being renegotiated right now. The government of BC says it can't bring the Sinixt to the negotiating table because the Colville Confederated Tribes represents the Sinixt and are already engaged with U.S. negotiators. BC says bringing the Sinixt in could jeopardize Canada's negotiating position and place the Sinixt in a conflict of interest.
It doesn't make any sense. The United States would never do anything with land in Canada, and that's where our territory is. So how would the United States represent us in Canada?
As long as our cultural memory goes, the headwaters of the Columbia, all the way down to Kettle Falls, that's where our home is. And so, I mean, that's how important it is. I don't think we can distinguish Sinixt separate from the Columbia River.
Stevie Seymour is Sinixt, and she is dedicated to revitalizing her culture. She says now is the time for Canada to right historic wrongs against the Sinixt, while the Columbia River Treaty is being renegotiated.
Canada talks about truth and reconciliation while sweeping us under the rug. And it's over and over again.
80% of the Sinixt traditional territory is in Canada, covering the main stem of the Columbia River. In the 1880s, when the Indian agent first came through Sinixt land, he missed them, which meant, in part, no reserve was set up. As a result, Sinixt were displaced across their territory, and hundreds moved into the U.S. Oatscott Reserve was established on the western shore of Arrow Lakes in 1902. Only 26 people moved there, and it's now underwater. The last registered person on the reserve, Annie Joseph, died in 1953. 3 years later, Canada and the U.S. started formal discussions that would become the Columbia River Treaty. Canada was already clearing land in the interior of BC to flood it. The treaty's purpose was for year-round electricity and flood control, with a series of dams and reservoirs. That same year, Canada declared the Sinixt extinct. Many historians and Sinixt say this isn't a coincidence.
We have been removed from the landscape of Canada. That is a complete genocide.
The treaty was signed in 1961 and ratified 3 years later.
The treaty we proclaim will lay a new foundation of prosperity for Canadians and Americans, for your West and for ours.
The U.S. paid Canada just over $64 million to control floods for 60 years. But come September 2024, that agreement expires, leaving either side open to make changes to the treaty or even terminate it. For the last 10 years, talks have been underway about these renegotiations, and Canada has been consulting with the Ktunaxa, Secwepemc, and Syilx Okanagan nations, but not the Sinixt.
Nothing's happening. Instead, they're working to make sure that we're not included, that in 2024 this is signed without one Sinixt voice saying anything.
The Sinixt moved near Kettle Falls, Washington, but when gold was found there, they were forced to move again to Inshalem, nowhere near their traditional territory.
Our home isn't a country. Our home is the Columbia River.
In 2021, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled the Sinixt is an Aboriginal people of Canada and were, in fact, not extinct. It meant that the Sinixt is entitled to exercise Section 35 of the Constitution. Section 35 recognizes and affirms the rights of Indigenous peoples, which includes the duty to consult.
They're acting like we don't exist, but the courts have said we do. The courts have confirmed we're Aboriginal people of Canada. What does that mean?
It's hard to know how much the Colville tribes are getting in the U.S. The State Department confirmed the tribe members signed non-disclosure agreements to ensure confidentiality of the negotiations. The chairman of the Colville Confederated Tribes confirmed with CBC that Canada has not reached out to them about the negotiations. The BC government acknowledges the Columbia River Treaty caused harm to First Nations. Its website talks about the damage flooding caused to First Nations land, fish, habitat, and artifacts, but doesn't say which First Nations it's referring to.
The surest sign I have of how significant this is that the Canadian government and the BC government have relentlessly refused to allow the Sinixt to be at the negotiating table. And I think that's the first clue that we're sitting on a really powerful moment here.
Eileen Delahanty-Perks has written books on the Columbia River Treaty and the Sinixt. She has reviewed documents that prove the BC government knowingly flooded land with Sinixt graves, and that 90% of archaeological sites in the Arrow Lakes were destroyed. Perks says there was a huge rush to build these dams because the U.S. offered Canada bonuses if they completed early.
It was just greed in the end that caused them to look away and allow these cultural sites to be flooded without preservation.
The river is essentially liquid gold. The treaty between the U.S. and Canada is there to ensure that every drop of water is being managed. In hydropower alone, the Columbia generates billions of dollars. It provides nearly 50% of BC's power and 40% of all U.S. hydroelectric power.
There's something very powerful going on when you take an extremely rich hydropower system worth billions of dollars and you expose a truth about the lack of ethics and the lack of truth in that process.
One other aspect in the renegotiations is the salmon. The fish have huge cultural significance to First Nations and tribes all along the river. Large dams in the U.S. have blocked salmon from accessing 40% of their natural habitat. Restoring the salmon to the Upper Columbia and repairing the ecosystem is a priority for DR Michelle.
Let's start to do those things we need to do to correct some of those historic wrongs and make this a better place for all of us, those future generations, for the benefit of all.
Recently, the Biden administration made a commitment, more than $200 million over 20 years to the Upper Columbia tribes to reintroduce salmon to the river. Michelle says his grandparents were the last people in his family to see salmon at Kettle Falls. If done right, future generations will see salmon return to the river.
We can have hydro production, we can have flood risk management, we can have our fish back. We can afford to do all of that. It doesn't have to be a fight over.
Unless Canada opens the door, and because of the Digital decision, the Sinixt only recourse may be legal action.
They have all of the same legal tools available to kind of force the government to the table that a group situated in Canada would. And that's the key takeaway. There's no higher legal bar for a group in the United States than there is in Canada.
But when the duty to consult applies in an international treaty is tricky. According to Brown, the courts haven't resolved if the government has a duty to consult during the negotiating phase. He says that may be purely a political matter and not for the courts to decide.
Even if it's legally unclear whether or not the government has to do it, there's nothing stopping the government from consulting, from engaging nations in the negotiation table if they think it's a good idea to do.
When the new treaty is implemented into Canadian law, this would likely be the phase where the duty to consult is triggered. For Seymour, though, she says the Sinixt should be consulted now.
Ideally, what would happen is Canada and the other tribes would say, hey, you know what, you have been blocked. You have been wronged here. And welcome to the table.
Negotiations will end in a matter of months. Who is to benefit and how the power of the Columbia will be harnessed for the next several decades is still to be decided. Jackie McKay for CBC Indigenous in Washington State.
During the first stage of his search, Ralph Buckley has found 59 people without any accommodation, 52 men and 7 women.
After the break, a deep look into our archives with a minister who reflects on homelessness over the last 30 years. You'll want to hear this. Hello to everyone watching our commercial-free live stream. Thanks for being here. A New Brunswick man is telling the story of his father's experience as a World War I horse transport driver to highlight the contributions of unsung heroes.
This picture was taken in 1916 at the station in Sackville, New Brunswick. That would have been taken when my father signed up and left Moncton to go to Sackville, where they did their first training in 1916. When he got over there, he was transferred to the 26th Battalion, which was out of St. John. They were called the Fighting 26 because they were a pretty hardy bunch, but they were also known as the Suicide Battalion because they had the machine gun corps in with them, and the machine gunners were a prime target for the enemy because you wipe out the machine gun nest, you save a lot of lives. And the horses are part of the hidden heroes of the logistics of the Canadian Armed Forces. They're not a fighting force, but often they're in the very aim of fire. They're in the danger areas, as my father was, driving horses up to the front line with ammunition. It couldn't be any more dangerous. Horses were big targets. He loved horses from being on the farm, or he volunteered actually to drive horses with ammunition and supplies up to the front line, mainly to the machine gun nest. And the conditions that the horses were in was absolutely terrible. Quite often they would be up to their waists in mud. The horses were important because other vehicles could not travel through the terrain that was beaten up so badly by bombs and some shell holes. The compass is the one that Dad used in the First World War. You can see that it has seen some action. There's some spots on it and so on. And he had to use this because a lot of the territory he was in was not very clearly marked. So you're looking at 107 years or so old. This is the real thing. This is my father's handwriting. So this is my 10 days in Passchendaele, and here he says mostly horse, because that's what he did, horses. The fields, buildings, roads, etc., for the last 3 or 4 miles on our way in have been pretty well demolished. The famous Cloth Hall of Ypres is about completely ruined, and the town is almost flat, with only a few of the church towers and Cloth Hall showing above the mud holes. It feels like we're very lucky to live the way we do. We will never know what he experienced, ever. We won't know it. Even modern warfare is different than it was back then. They were in the trenches for 2 years. Mud, water, rats, lice, everything. It was terrible. We have to know what's going on. We have to remember, and we have to pay attention. And it's not just to honor the dead and the soldiers in the past. It's to stop.
It is Throwback Thursday, and it is time for a deep dive into our vast CBC archives. Homelessness is a grim reality in our world and a serious issue for all levels of government. But it didn't become a social crisis in North America until the 1980s. This story from 1986 highlights how homelessness was perceived at that time. Have a look.
These two fellows spent the night under a bridge abutment near Main Street in the East End. They stayed dry, covered with old blankets and sleeping bags. A civic worker woke them up at daybreak, and they were on their way.
What we're hoping to do is to find out just how large a problem we have in Vancouver.
Now, we're talking about hardcore individuals that are outside almost all of the time, are we not?
That's how, in this survey, we've defined it. Homeless meaning people who sleep in the park, sleep in Smith Rights, sleep in alleyways, and that they have no shelter.
1987 has been designated the year of the homeless in Canada and the U.S. During the first stage of his search, Ralph Buckley has found 59 people without any accommodation, 52 men and 7 women.
They may be out of money for, because they're unemployed. They may be out of money because, they run out of welfare, and that I think you'd almost have to take it, case by case.
We found 6 people this morning, most of them under bridges. None of them would talk to us. A number of social agencies come in contact with the homeless. Diane McDonald, who works at a detox center, says many only ask for help when they're desperate.
So a lot of these people choose to live this way. They don't want to have a permanent home. They have ended up homeless because of in many cases, their substance abuse problem. They've been asked to leave their residences, or they have spent all their money on alcohol or drugs, and so have found themselves homeless. And a certain percentage like living on the streets or in the parks or under the bridges.
Many homeless people spend their days in places like the Dugout on Powell Street or rooms in the First United Church on Main. They can get hot food and warm up. Reverend Barry Morris says most of these people have just given up.
What's difficult is for people who have, in a sense, run out of their luck or have had so many doors closed in their face that they've developed a hostile reaction themselves to help that's available or resources that are available.
Few of us will ever have to live like this. Most people couldn't. A cement viaduct over our heads for a roof. A garbage-strewn area for a floor. But for some of the street people of Vancouver, it's the only thing that they know. Bob Gillingham, CBC News.
The minister you saw in that story joins us now, Reverend Barry Smith with Longhouse Native. Barry Morris. Barry, I am so sorry. Barry Morris, okay, Longhouse Native Ministry. Thank you for joining us. We saw you there for 1986. Talking about some of the hostility that people feel even when help is available because so many doors are slammed in their face. What goes through your mind 30 years later?
Well, some of that still prevails. On the one hand, there seems to be a lot more services or responses to the epidemic, if you want to call it that, or certainly the plague, the reality of homelessness. There's been lots of efforts through various city administrations, even with provincial help, et cetera. As people have committed to, and to some extent try to follow through in their political commitments to improve the situation of the homeless by way of trying to make up for the continuous loss of so-called SROs, single room or occupancy kind of hotels. A lot of them have been, people have been rent-evicted, and either the building's been totally demolished and sometimes rebuilt, sometimes lie just in vacant land for a good period of time. Shelters have popped up, I think some more favorable to those who are homeless than others for various reasons, hospitality, considerations for what it takes to get off the street and to begin to go back to school and or some employment or some apprenticeship. It takes time, and if a person's not entrenched, that was a term that the late John Turvey used, who worked a lot with street youth. If the person's not entrenched, like habituated virtually, to that reality of being homeless and that sometimes merciless and almost, you might want to say, addictive merry-go-round, then there are chances for change.
I have to ask, that story said they counted 59 people experiencing homelessness. The most recent Metro Vancouver count had that at almost 6,000, if I'm getting the numbers right. What goes through your mind when you hear the scale of the change?
Well, it's a lot. It's a quantum leap. I mean, I'm influenced by and I've supported to some extent the work of Judy Graves, who was, of course, the Vancouver City of Vancouver's housing person on the street for a very long time, and had then and still has a gracious hospitality and a way of speaking with people that is warm, so respectful, and that kind of person in that kind of role, I'm afraid to say, has been either dropped or receded, maybe institutionalized so that it's not visible anymore, not as personal as it was under Judy's period of time. There's a lot of other people, too, that, I mean, when Jim Green was with DERA, before he rose to the level of higher things and with the provincial government, et cetera, he did a lot of detached work and street work. And the late Jamie Hamilton did that as a transgendered activist who made contact on the streets. The late Ina Rollins started an organization called, good Lord.
That's okay.
Yeah, you know, I mean,
a lot of work has been done.
A lot of work, yeah.
When you, and not to put too much pressure on you, but given your experience in the decades that you've been serving people as you have, do you see a solution to this?
Not an easy one, and not a short-term one, Dan. I mean, the thing is, it does involve money, steadfast or sustained commitment. I mean, under Philip Owen's mayorship, and then Campbell, I forget which came first, but they were back to back.
And then
yeah, there was significant efforts made into trying to get something done around homelessness and some of the things that were part of being homeless, as in addiction. Not that every homeless person was an addict, but some may have slipped in and out of it, depending upon the level of their stability, mental health, who they hung out with or didn't hang out with, as the case may be, whether they were still in touch with family or no longer in touch with family. They may have found substitute families, not always healthy, not always mature or viable or stable. But there were situations that were favorable to a homeless person in terms of what was available, especially in terms of bonding with somebody who was either working, say, with the city like Judy was, or like the Downtown East Side Residents Association, and God, I wish they still existed, like Jim Green was.
I have to interrupt you, Barry.
Please.
Just to wrap up quickly.
Okay.
Do you have any hope around this situation?
Well, it goes up and down. I mean, I take the realities, two sides of the same coin, perhaps, of hope and despair very seriously. I've come to feel that hope is a relative term, not an absolute, like you might say love is, or justice might be, but hope needs help. It's a relative term, so it needs relative, so to speak. The First Nations term, all my relations, when prayer is said or a blessing is said, hope needs help from all different levels. What I worry about a lot right now is the overdose crisis. The fentanyl is a poisonous substance, and I'm sometimes absolutely baffled by what the public authorities are doing, the research authorities, academia, advocates. I'm a part of a group called Healing Hearts. It's an offshoot of Mum Stop the Harm. And they take very seriously what issued under Philip Owen's morality, and that is the four pillars.
That's right.
You know, education at one level, at one end, law enforcement at the other end, and in between, the need for detox and treatment and/or harm reduction if detox and treatment wasn't working or couldn't yet work. And loads of compassion that you can't name or put into a formula that just automatically works when you try to apply it.
Reverend Barry Morris, I hate to interrupt you. We appreciate your time and your perspective 30 years, 40 years later, and now. Thanks for sharing.
A pleasure. I'm glad the program was on.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Thanks, Ann. I can take leave.
Fears in Montreal's Jewish community as 2 Jewish schools are shot at overnight. The United calls for calm and understanding as Middle East tensions boil over in Canada. That's next.
For 5 years, Jim and Bev Day's backyard and house in Surrey have been a hospital for injured birds of prey. Now the cages are coming down. The days are moving. This place just isn't big enough anymore.
We've outgrown our backyard, and we've outgrown the house. Where we're moving to has a huge shop on it, all insulated. So, like, lots of times when we get busy, I end up playing, musical cages and musical rooms. The only one in the house hasn't had birds in it has been the bedroom.
The Days started out breeding and looking after domestic birds. Then a vet gave them an injured red-tailed hawk. That got them started nursing birds of prey back to health. Mostly they get owls. This is the first to be moved.
Got lucky. What's only one? Here. Thank you. Settle down. Get your wings in.
The Days' new home is on 3 acres in Surrey. They need the space. What started out as a small backyard operation has become a non-profit society that nursed 150 birds last year. Now they'll be able to handle even more.
Easy. Well, with what we've got here, and if funding comes in, we should be able to handle up to 400 birds at a time here with no problem.
Is there that much demand?
Well, hopefully not. But we've had, just in birds of prey, 30 birds on hand at one time, and that's an awful lot of birds to look after.
With the extra space, the Days will also take in songbirds and ducks, something they didn't do before. And they plan to stay at this new site for a while.
I could never stop doing it.
You just like helping birds?
I love it. I really do. They're gorgeous, and their personalities are also different. Each one has a different personality. All the injuries are different. You'd hardly ever end up with the same injury or like that. It's beautiful. It's a good feeling.
The Days say they need volunteers and material like old plywood to get their new location going. Anyone who'd like to help can call the Owl Rehabilitation Society at 591-9573.
Police in Montreal are trying to find whoever shot at 2 Jewish schools overnight. They were empty at the time, so thankfully no one was hurt. Matt Damore has more on what happened and the reaction.
The search for bullet casings outside Yeshiva Gedola of Montreal, one of the 2 Jewish schools targeted by gunfire. Staff at both buildings called 911 this morning when they found a bullet hole on front entrance doors.
And the information that we got at this point is that the gunshots were fired during the night, so there was no one in the school.
David Oliel studies at Yeshiva Gedola of Montreal. He says he won't hide his Jewish identity, but the shooting is alarming.
Sends a message, a threatening message to our lives, especially that we see throughout history this is how we are treated. So it's not surprising, it's shocking, and it's a wake-up call that it's not something I'm reading on the news, it's something that's happening to me.
C'est une forme de terrorisme, ça, là, quand tu commences à tirer sur des écoles. Là.
Quebec's education minister, Bernard Drainville, saying shooting at schools is a form of terrorism, adding his voice to a chorus of political condemnation today.
That kind of violence doesn't have its place in Quebec, doesn't have its place anywhere else. I mean, we need to take this seriously.
We are seeing an increase in threats of violence, in hatred. That's not who we are.
The gunshots come after a synagogue and a Jewish community center in the suburb of Dollard-des-Ormeaux were hit by Molotov cocktails earlier this week. Federation CJA spoke out then and again today.
When we said that a line had been crossed, I never thought that 2 days later I would have to say that line's been pushed even further. And I don't want to be sitting here in a day or two talking about what the next steps are.
As police continue to investigate, Montreal's mayor says they'll increase their presence around places that could be the targets of hate crimes, like places of worship and schools. Matt Damour, CBC News, Montreal.
You've heard of our food products getting smaller, so-called shrinkflation. So what's skimpflation? We'll explain cutting corners with familiar products.
Really, any pump track is fun, but this one is really special.
Cale Dutt's dream of having a pump track in Sydney has finally come true. 2 years ago, when he was just 9 years old, Dutt tested out a pump track in Dartmouth, and he quickly fell in love.
At the beginning, it was just like, I would like this to be here, but I didn't think it would get this far. But now seeing that this is here, it's really nice that a lot of people can enjoy this.
Pump tracks feature moguls and ramps that are strategically placed to generate speed. To get more people behind his idea, Dutt handed out flyers and met with local politicians. And in June, the CBRM awarded a $300,000 tender for the track's design and construction, with the federal government chipping in money for the project.
Earlier when I just got here, someone told me that his kids love it here and they ask him right after school to come here, and it's really special that so many people can help make this a happy place for little kids.
Corey Moore of Howie Centre began biking when he was about 5 years old. He eventually followed his passion to Europe, where he was building mountain bike parks.
Part of the reason why I left was the lack of things like this. So like it keeps the youth here, right? It's fun, it's good family fun, it's for the community, it's free to use, and you know, yeah, we see this stuff on TV all over the world, and we want it here too. Let's go for it.
Moore has already tried the Sydney pump track and says the outdoor facility should draw more people to the local area.
This is a great thing. Nobody, like, you hear a lot of the people moving out west and moving here and there. It's not necessarily for the jobs. It's for the things that keep the kids active and having fun.
The track was built on the former Neville Park soccer field in Whitney Pier. Dutt hopes that people young and old will enjoy it as a place to have fun and get some exercise. Erin Potty, CBC News, Sydney.
You may have heard about shrinkflation when companies shrink food products, but you might not be aware of a similar practice, skimpflation. That's when companies change food recipes, and as the CBC's Sophia Harris shows us, some shoppers are very unhappy.
You might remember them from your youth. Quaker Dips granola bars.
Dipped in delicious real milk chocolate.
But the Dips bars are no longer covered in milk chocolate. Instead, it's a chocolatey coating with palm oil, and it's not real chocolate.
It appears that they've used palm oil to get similar texture and quality of the chocolate, but it doesn't meet the standard of identity in Canada.
Why do you think the company may have made this change?
It could be a cost-saving measure. So we know that cocoa ingredients tend to be more expensive than other products like vegetable oil, especially palm oil.
When food companies swap out ingredients for cheaper alternatives but don't lower the price, it's known as skimpflation.
It's really an unknown, sneaky way to give you less for your money.
The old and current dips packaging look very similar, but only the old box says the bars are made with real milk chocolate.
The new package actually doesn't contain real milk chocolate anymore.
Some people who buy dips bars didn't know about the change.
I think it's just a deception technique that they're looking for, getting a cheaper product out there. Are you going to buy this bar anymore?
Now that you've pointed this out, I probably won't.
I think because of inflation, we're seeing more examples of skimpflation.
This U.S.-based consumer advocate posts online apparent examples of skimpflation, like this wishbone salad dressing sold in U.S. stores and on Amazon in Canada.
The one on the left has more oil in it. So they took out some of the oil and they seemingly replaced it with water and salt. That saved them money.
Carbohydrates, protein.
Companies are required to list ingredients on food labels. This registered dietitian says they should also have to alert customers when they make recipe changes.
I think it comes down to clearly communicating to consumers so that they can make informed decisions.
The companies that make the bars and the salad dressing did not respond to requests for comment. Last month, the federal government said it will investigate skimpflation, but it has no action plan as of yet. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
Darius Madavi is back with our BC-wide weather forecast. The full version, we had drought, and now what was a very dry month last month.
Yes, and now we have heat to talk about because in October, around the world, we saw the hottest October on record. We were actually on track for one of, if not the hottest October on record here in Vancouver, but we had that cold spell come in at the end of the month that just sort of threw us off the track. So not breaking records here, but around the world, certainly you can see the anomaly by far much higher than any October in the past. And if we take a look at the past years, this line here is this year, 2016 is this other red line here. You can see 2016 is the previous hottest year on record. It looks like we are virtually certain to break that record this year. 2023 will be the hottest year on record, or I will eat my shoe because it's pretty much certain. Now you can see the anomaly here is gigantic, and if you take a look at past years, how much we've risen is really incredible compared to especially the fact that we're just getting into El Nino. So very much a precarious situation there. But if we turn our attention to BC, we have some more rain coming our way, as we talked about earlier. Most of that rain coming tonight for the coast, easing off as we get into tomorrow. But we get some impulses here in Vancouver overnight and then into tomorrow morning. And then our next system starts to roll through by tomorrow afternoon, reaching Vancouver, and that continues to move across the province. So plenty of precipitation coming. Should be a fairly wet weekend, but for the most part, we're looking at scattered showers here in Vancouver. Most of our rain, if we get it, will be coming sort of tomorrow and Saturday in the form of just those showers, just popping up and coming in and out. Now, we do have a wind warning still in place, moving from Haida Gwaii down to the Central Coast and the North Island. Winds expected around 90 kilometers per hour. And across the province tomorrow, expect mostly sunny skies with a bit of snow or rain in the southeast and mostly rain on the coast. And here in Vancouver, still a very consistent forecast, but those showers possible tomorrow and then just intermittent rain on the weekend.
Possible intermittent?
Yes.
No. And just, I speak on behalf of at least one person when I say, don't eat your shoe, even with some fancy mustard.
Fine.
Very good.
Fine, Dan.
Food, dance, and colors. We're going to show you how some people are celebrating Diwali, the Festival of Lights, this weekend. Stick around.
Hey, I'm Shane Mendonça. I make plant music, and this is how I do it. Basically, we attach two sensors to a plant, for example, this canna lily, and the electrical output from the plant is then registered by a biofeedback sensor over here, and this is then responsible for distributing data in the system. Now this is a modular synthesizer, of course, and we use something called control voltage, which basically is something similar to like MIDI, but it works with voltage rather than data. And what we do here is we take these patch cables, all these cables like that, and we patch them into points and make connections through which this data can be distributed. In my system here, I have this biofeedback sensor that is a quad random generator, which means that it picks up signals from the plant and then uses all the data in a randomly distributed way to then move along the patch. This triggers a couple of samplers that I have here, and it also triggers one analog oscillator, and I've got effects in the system, a couple of sample players and MIDI playback devices, and some Swiss Army knife modules that you can kind of use as, depending what you desire. Now, all this is connected to, at this moment, it's connected to my Moogs here, the Moog grandmother, as we know, is a mono synth, and we have the DFAM, which is a drum machine, but I'm using it as a synth voice in this stage. And what happens here is that the plant is controlling these two synthesizers. So if I play some music and turn up the volume here, you're going to hear what the plant's doing. So the plant is controlling the LFO. It's also controlling the notes, okay, via CV here into this oscillator, and it's also triggering envelopes. So that gives you the whole musical kind of movement that we're used to. And this similar thing is happening over here with the DFAM. So these are playing in tandem, and that's what you get. It's plant music in a nutshell.
South Asian communities in BC are celebrating Diwali this weekend, the Festival of Lights. Our Saurabh Sandhu has more from one local group who's been leading the celebrations for 20 years.
Volunteers at Coquitlam's Evergreen Cultural Centre are hard at work making rangoli, an intricate floor decoration that has become synonymous with Diwali celebrations around the world. This year, the bright colors have been replaced by pastels.
We make sure that we use eco-friendly products so it's not harmful for the kids.
But there are plenty of colors in everything else around this event, from traditional Indian clothing to decor and lights, and plenty of colorful performances. The event has been put by Diwali Fest, an organization leading the community Diwali celebrations in Vancouver for the past 20 years.
We often see families with grandparents and young children coming in, and they're just so excited and happy, to be here, to have something to go to and celebrate in a meaningful way. There's such a huge demand for Diwali festivities. We have expanded to Surrey, Coquitlam, Burnaby. This year we have done events in Richmond in the past. So, through different partnerships and collaborations.
The events run in the days leading up to Diwali, and this year provided a platform to over 200 local and emerging artists. For the Fest 20-year milestone, organizers chose a wedding theme.
This year we wanted to do something different, something vibrant, colorful, fun, festive that would really engage the audiences and give them a chance to experience South Asian culture and the beauty of the celebrations that go around it.
The event also attracts people who are new to Diwali and looking to learn more about the festival.
People are not aware about the what is the traditional art, what is the rangoli about, and what is the henna work. You can see the henna work and other stuff.
We have so much diversity, so much richness that we can enjoy right on our doorsteps, on our neighborhood.
This weekend will be a busy one as families and friends gather to celebrate the day of Diwali on Sunday. And due to popular demand, Diwali Fest will hold another event the following weekend. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Coquitlam.
And happy Diwali to everybody who's celebrating. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, our free app, as well as YouTube and our website, cbc.ca/BC. I will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. We'll see you then.